I speak quite a bit on the channel about history and the importance of our heritage. And one thing I've been thinking about quite a bit about as of late is my religious heritage and the importance of our religious heritage. Most Americans, I think it's about 75%, don't know where their great grandparents are buried, which means most Americans don't know where their great grandparents and beyond went to church because most of our great grandparents are buried at church. And that means Americans have become very much disconnected from our heritage as a country because in the past the church was really at the center of the community, literally at the center of the community. The churches were in the center of town, and you were baptized at the church, confirmed at the church, married at the church, and were buried at the church, and you baptized and confirmed your own children there as well. And you would spend every Sunday at the church because most people worked 6 days a week back then, and they would spend Sunday mornings and sometimes even Sunday evenings at church. And all those beautiful churches, you have to remember that people actually came together, donated their money and their time, because often people would actually work together to build the church. They would, all those old historic buildings you see, people would come together to build those churches, and at the very least give all their money, but even sometimes like come together and actually build the church. And there's just this heritage, this community that's been completely lost for a lot of people. And I've been thinking a lot about my own religious heritage because, I've actually learned more about it as of late. It started this Thanksgiving. We went to go see some of my more distant relatives on my maternal side of the family because they're all getting old. And I must get my love of history from this side of the family because they all know their history very well, a lot about their own family. They told me a lot about my own family heritage on that side. But one thing my great aunt told me, she showed me some photos of some of my relatives, now deceased, very old photos from the 19th century, 20th century, early 20th century. She was showing me the photos and telling me about the people. And one of the people she pointed to was an old woman. And she said that she was her great aunts. My great aunt's born the 1940s. This woman's born in the late 19th century. So pretty far back. And she told me that she was in church with her. And that side of the family is historically Southern Baptist. My mother was a Southern Baptist. My father was a United Methodist. And she told me that she was in church with that woman, her great aunt, and she pointed to the church across the street, and she said she was baptized there. And that church was a Presbyterian church, and I didn't know that my family that far back was Presbyterian. So that was very exciting because that means that my family was Presbyterian when they left Ireland or Scotland, England, for Scots-Irish. But my family was Presbyterian historically, and then they became Baptist in the 19th century, which was pretty fascinating to learn. If you come here to the North Carolina and South Carolina too, you'll see a bunch of Presbyterian churches because the Scottish, when they came here, brought Presbyterianism with them. But then all their descendants became Baptist and Methodist. So a lot of those Presbyterian churches are just filled with a bunch of old people now, which is very sad. But it's just how the cookie crumbled. Just all these Scots-Irish people just became Baptist instead of Presbyterian. But it was just fascinating to learn that further back, my family's Presbyterian. And then on my father's side of the family, they've been Methodist for a very long time. And I was looking for some of my great-grandmother's things. I actually knew my great-grandmother. She was born back in the 1920s, grew up in the Depression and through World War II. Her husband was a World War II vet. And I had the privilege of knowing her in her later years. She passed away when I was 14, but I had the privilege of knowing her, and she was a good Christian woman, in church every Sunday, a good God-fearing grandmother, and I'm glad I knew her. But she's from West Virginia, actually, originally. Her father died inside a coal mining accident, and they came down here when she was young. So my family actually further back is actually from West Virginia, which is pretty cool. And I was looking through some of her things, and I actually saw a thing. I believe it was on the envelope she put money in for the collection plate, and it actually had the name of the small town she came from in West Virginia, and it was the Methodist church in that town, the local Methodist church in that little town in West Virginia. And I was like, wow, it kind of hit me that my family, and I had known, I should have been able to put two and two together because she was a Methodist, but my family, that means my great grandfather, her dad, and great grandmother, her mother, were also Methodist. And I was really surprised. I should have known that, but it was just very interesting to learn. And I've studied West Virginia, and I know that I've been to West Virginia a few times, but I learned this a while back that I believe Methodists are actually still the largest group of Christians in West Virginia, which is pretty surprising. Most southern states is the Baptist, but in West Virginia, it's actually the Methodists are the largest group, which is really cool. But that also means because West Virginia is a very Methodist state, and my great grandma uh, parents were Methodists in West Virginia. That means that my Methodist roots go way back, even further back, because it probably means that several generations before her were probably Methodists, because West Virginia is a very Methodist area historically. And also, my great grandfather, I believe he was a Methodist too. I mean, he at least became a Methodist. I don't know what he was born, but I'm pretty sure he was born a Methodist. Actually, yeah, that's right. He must have been a Methodist because his family was from from that same small town. They lived in this small town, and his family's been there like since they came from Wales. So yes, they must have been Methodist. Actually, yeah, yeah. Yes, I'm sorry. I'm just thinking about all this now. It just kind of hit me like, yes, I just remember like I've seen his own father, who like my great grandpa, buried in that graveyard. So they've been going there for a very long time. So at the very least, my family's been Methodist for like 5 generations, if not further back, and actually at least 6 generations because my grandfather took me to go see a grave because he's actually taking. So I live inside a rural area and we don't have much to do. So sometimes something we'll do inside a rural area is we'll actually go to churches and look at the graveyards because we don't have parks out here. So maybe that's just my family, but that's what we'll do sometimes. We'll just go look at graveyards. I think it's quite interesting personally. But my grandfather took me to go to his local Methodist church. It's not that far from here. And he showed me where some of my grandparents and stuff were buried. And he said his grandparents were Methodist and they went to that church, which means that my family has been Methodist for a very long time. I know I went on a bit of a tangent there, but I mean, it was just really cool knowing that like my family has been Methodist for a very, very, very long time, and learning about that was very fascinating to me. My family's been Methodist since at least the 19th century, if not further back, which is pretty cool. Learning about all that, and also learning that my mother's side of the family used to be Presbyterian, that was also just very fascinating to me personally. And I thought that was quite interesting because I know it's very sad that most Americans don't have a clue about the religious heritage. Most Americans are like, what's a Presbyterian? They wouldn't have a clue what the religious heritage is. It's very sad because, I mean, all throughout this country, you will find beautiful churches, Protestant churches in the center of town, small towns, or just beautiful Protestant churches in rural areas with full cemeteries. And the congregation is probably mostly filled with old people, and the church is beautiful. And that means that the younger generations apostatize. They either left Christianity altogether or at the very least left that church, which is really sad because it used to be common in America to go to the same church your grandfather went to. And I do think this is a big part of the reason what's wrong with our culture, that we have no clue what our religious heritage is. And I do think our religious heritage is important. Like a lot of people are trying to say that we should become this sect of Christian or we should become this sect of Christian to save America. I put out the non-denominationals. The non-denominationals could not, you can't, this is really something I'm starting to realize that if you want to save America, want to save our culture, want to save our civilization, you have to become a mainline Protestant. And not all mainline Protestants are even liberal. Southern Baptists and Missouri Synod Lutherans are mainline Protestants, and they're not liberal. But as I was saying, you really should become a mainline Protestant because that's why they're called the mainline Protestant churches. And the American Baptists aren't that liberal either. But as I was saying, the mainline Protestant churches are called the mainline because the historic Protestant churches. They're where most Americans have historically gone. Those are the historic Protestant churches in America that Americans have gone to historically. And since we've abandoned those, our culture has just collapsed. I mean, Christianity in this country is collapsing. And that's because we saw the Great Retreatism, the fundamentalist modernist controversy was 100 years ago now. I mean, I'm thinking about, the great battle between the fundamentalists and the modernists in the 20s. What was it? Shall the Fundamentalists Win? That famous sermon by that very liberal Presbyterian minister, Reverend Fosdick, who denied the virgin birth and a second coming of our Lord, and almost many other things in that sermon. He preached that in 1922, and then the Scopes Monkey trial was in 1925. So the fundamentalist modernist controversy is now 100 years ago. I mean, what was it? The fundamentals, they get their name from the book called The Fundamentals. Like they were these pamphlets. I know the word fundamentalist was coined back in 1919. So all this stuff is now 100 years ago now, and that was the beginning of the end of American Christianity, I think, because, I mean, the fundamentalists who believed in actual Christianity left the Protestant church and then allowed the Protestant churches to become more and more liberal. And the fundamentalists, just spent time bickering and dividing into smaller and smaller groups. And that's kind of where American Christianity has been. So, I mean, you have the non-denominationals who are modernists. I mean, that's really what they are. Yes, I've criticized the mainline Protestant church for modernism, but I mean, the non-denominationals are perhaps even worse than the modernism because, I mean, forming your own church and a very hideous church, like non-denominationals are intentionally trying to have absolutely no association with historic Christianity at all. That's what they're trying to do. That they don't want any historic Christianity at all. So they're building church unhistoric as possible. The sermons are unhistoric as possible. Really, their theology is unhistoric. They have nothing to do with history. That's pure, unadulterated modernism. They may not deny the virgin birth or the second coming of our Lord or his resurrection, even though some of them are vile heretics because there's no checks and balances on doctrine. And the non-denominationals are pure modernists. And think about this as well. I kind of came to this conclusion the other day that we're seeing a new rise of fundamentalism. It's not Protestant fundamentalism. Protestant fundamentalism is, most of the culture doesn't take it very seriously. You have your fundamentalist Protestants, but a lot of people look down on that sort of religion. But what we're seeing now is the rise of a new sort of fundamentalism, the ecclesialist fundamentalism. Ecclesialists are churches that claim to be the one true church. So the big ecclesialist denominations are the Roman Catholic Church, the Eastern Orthodox Church, and the Oriental Orthodox Church. And what I'm getting ready to say, if you're inside that tradition, I'm not targeting this at you. There are fundamentalists in all traditions of Christianity. That doesn't, for instance, there are fundamentalist Baptists. That doesn't make all Baptists fundamentalist. And so the same way, there are fundamentalist Orthodox. That don't make all Orthodox fundamentalists. But it doesn't change the fact that there is a Orthodox fundamentalist movement right now. So, I mean, that's what we're seeing right now. It's kind of what I think this great epiphany that what we're really seeing right now in American culture inside the church is that armies of fundamentalist Protestants are becoming fundamentalist Catholics and fundamentalist Orthodox. That's really what we're seeing. They're becoming, they're changing what they believe, but they're still believing like a fundamentalist. And they're still fundamentalist. I mean, if something looks like a fundamentalist, acts like a fundamentalist, it's a fundamentalist. So, I mean, this is what we're really seeing is a rise of a new fundamentalism. And I'm seeing a similar error to what we saw 100 years ago, because the fundamentalists 100 years ago were like, we need to run away. Jesus is coming back soon. We need to run away from the culture, run away from the society, run away from the institutions. And that's what the fundamentalists were doing 100 years ago. And what are you seeing today? Especially the fundamentalists are doing the same thing. They're saying, let's run away. The Protestant church has problems. The mainline Protestant church has its problems. So let's just run away from the religious heritage. Forget the church your grandparents went to and are buried at. Forget that tradition altogether. Become Eastern Orthodox, become Roman Catholic. Some Americans are a sizable chunk of Americans are historically Roman Catholic. So that's one thing. But I mean, a lot of people that are historically Protestant are becoming, tradcasts, which aren't even the mainstream Catholic Church. I mean, a lot of them are actively disagreeing with the Pope, which is like you're being a bad Catholic. I mean, because a lot of them are even accusing the Pope of being a false teacher or something. But anyways, that's a conversation for a completely different video. I'm probably going to do a video on ecclesialism at some point because I think it's one of the false teachings of our time. Not the churches themselves. They're not apostate churches. I think the Lord is calling some people legitimately to Roman Catholicism and some people to Eastern Orthodoxy. I just don't think He's calling all those people to it. I think some people are just being scared into it. But we're seeing a new kind of fundamentalism. For instance, I'm working on a video about ecclesialism. And I was watching some videos, some pro-Orthodox, some anti-Orthodox, and I was watching some videos of people talking about how they left Orthodoxy, and just the comments in those videos were vile. Like I just saw some horrible, very sick things. People that are not Christian at all. I mean, they may be Christian, but the way they're acting is not very Christian. Having the right doctrines about everything doesn't matter if you can't follow the golden rule. I don't care what ecumenical council agrees with you or anything of that nature. If you cannot love your neighbor as you love yourself, you're failing as a Christian. And there's a lot of these online swarms of ecclesialists. They're so convinced they're right about everything. They're not acting Christian at all. They're not praying for their enemies. A lot of them say they're going to pray for you, but they're not actually praying for you. It's just like a show. It's like the Pharisees, They talk about prayer, but it's all for show. It's all for show. We're just seeing like this new fundamentalism in this day. People acting like fundamentalists. One thing that really reminded me that a lot of people are just fundamentalists that just became another type of fundamentalist is that on some of those videos I talk about people leaving Eastern Orthodoxy. I saw a lot of people say they were never really Orthodox, and that reminded me of when fundamentalist Protestants say they were never really Christian. And I'm like, hold on. These were just people that were fundamentalist Protestants and they just became fundamentalist Orthodox, aren't they? And it's just like, it's just a new form of fundamentalism. They're running away from the culture, running away from the institution. Um, it's just new fundamentalism. I mean, a big thing a lot of the Orthodox apologists, the pop apologists, I'm really trying to stress this. There's a very big difference between like the intellectual Orthodox and a lot of Orthodox Universalists that are listening, because I do know that some of y'all are Orthodox Universalists. There's a very big difference between y'all and between like the fundamentalists inside your tradition. I'm not trying to attack the Orthodox Church or the Catholic Church as a whole. I'm pointing out the fundamentalist parts of those denominations, not the denomination as a whole. Okay, make that very clear. But you really are seeing this new fundamentalism, people acting like fundamentalists because they are fundamentalists. Just a new form of fundamentalists, because fundamentalists say have to have, got to dot every T, cross every I. Maybe it's the other way around with that saying, but they got to have everything right, and they got to have everything. A lot of people are just pure fundamentalists, and I mean that's what we're seeing is this new ecclesialist fundamentalism, and a lot of all this. It's just a new fundamentalism, and they're repeating the error of the fundamentalists of 100 years ago. They're running away from the culture. And I do think that we need to be involved with the mainline Protestant churches because America is historically a Protestant country. If America became an Orthodox country tomorrow, a lot of people, they're like, oh, we're going to save America. You're not going to save America if it becomes Eastern Orthodox, because America is a Protestant country with a Protestant culture. And if America becomes an Eastern Orthodox country, it's going to look more like Russia than it does America. I mean, the biggest difference I would argue between Russia and America is religion. Both countries have vast natural resources, large and diverse populations. Yes, Russia's a bit of a disadvantage because Russia's colder than America, which means like their ports and stuff will freeze over in winter. So, I mean, they are at a disadvantage, but still, I would say the biggest difference is religion. America's a Protestant country. Russia is an Orthodox country. I'd say the biggest difference is religion. And I'd say the biggest reason why Latin America, for instance, why is America and Canada rich? Why is Latin America poor? I'd say it's religion. America is a Protestant country. Latin America is Catholic. I really do think the religion has a big part to do with it because we have that Protestant work ethic. And I hear a lot of, there's been some going around online against the Protestant work ethic. And maybe in excess it can be a problem. But I mean, traditional Protestants are very serious about taking Sunday off. And I mean, everything in moderation. I think the Protestant work ethic is good. Maybe it can be taken to an extreme. But I mean, the Protestant work ethic done right has allowed for America in the course of about 50 years to go from the East Coast to the West Coast, Philadelphia to San Francisco in the course of about 50 years, allowed America to win 2 world wars, and we are the biggest reason why we won the world wars. I know some Europeans are like, no, but no, the Americans are the reason why Germany did not win World War One, and why ultimately the Allies won World War Two. I mean, we won 2 world wars, and we went to the moon. That's all because of the Protestant work ethic, I would argue, and the Protestant culture we have as a country. And I really am starting to see the importance of the mainline Protestant churches and just knowing our religious heritage and being involved in the religious heritage. Something I talk about quite a bit is the importance of the mainline, because the mainline are probably the least bad option for Christian Universalists, because yes, there's a bunch of liberal mainline churches, but I've talked before that a lot of mainline Protestant churches are not super duper liberal. Not every mainline Protestant church has a pride flag. And every mainline Protestant church is, as I would say, woke. A lot of mainline churches are actually decent places to go to church where the word of God is preached and the sacraments are administered. They're not all these bastions of hyper-liberalism. So, I mean, a lot of mainline churches are worth saving is what I'm trying to say. They're not all too far gone. And I do think we really should. I always try to get people to go attend mainline Protestant churches, especially as Christian Universalists, because, I mean, I notice a lot of Universalists either don't go to church at all, or we go to churches where we can be open Universalists. And I'm like, there are churches in most towns in America where you can be an open Universalist and it not be a super duper liberal church. And I'm like, why can't you just go join that church? I mean, it might be a little bit hard because some mainline churches are actually so conservative that you might get some real pushback for being Universalist. But I mean, it's worth a shot. You know what I mean? I think we really should be involved. I've talked before about the importance of institutional Universalism and how in the 19th century, when there was a Universalist denomination, we would have a real impact on the culture that we just don't have today. So I really do think Universalists should be involved in the institutions and reforming the institutions. And And I really do, just the older, because I was originally born a mainline Protestant, born United Methodist, and I'm really starting to see the importance of the mainline and not giving up on the mainline Protestant tradition. And that's what I'm trying to do. I believe mainline Protestantism. I think that mainline Protestants have the best worship out of any Christians, really. I mean, I've been to the Catholic service, I've been to the Orthodox service. They're good, but I prefer Anglican, especially Anglican, but mainline Protestant services overall. I think they have the better worship. I know some people are going to be like, what? But I mean, yeah, I really do believe that. And I think the mainline Protestants have the better worship, the prettier buildings. I mean, if you if you ask a normal person, like, what do you think church, name like a church song, it's probably going to be like Amazing Grace or Silent Night or something that a Protestant wrote. It's almost always a Protestant hymn. So I mean, the Protestant hymn music I think has been the most influential hymn music. And a big reason I am Protestant is that I think Protestantism has done the most good in the world. Like, people are like, there's modernism in Protestantism. You know, the non-denominationals are embracing modernism, and the mainline churches are embracing modernism. Well, doesn't the devil attack things he doesn't like? Doesn't Satan and his army of demons attack churches that are fighting against him? Doesn't, it's like, if we're the army of God, it makes sense that the army of the devil would be on the offensive. Trying to attack us. And rather, sorry, I meant to say the defensive. They're really defensive. They're on the defense and they're trying to fight back. And Protestantism has its issues because I believe the devil is actively trying to destroy the Protestant church. He's really trying to destroy every church. He tried to destroy the Orthodox Church last century, and he's going to try to do that this century as well. But I'm like, the devil clearly does not like the Protestant faith. If he's actively gone out of his way, him and his angels have gone out of his way to destroy the Protestant church. And I'm like, instead of running away from the church the church our country was built on, running away from the heritage of our ancestors, our ancestors poured time and money into building these buildings and spent years going to these churches. I mean, think about this. Your grandparents, great grandparents, the people who are the reason you're here today, are buried at some church somewhere you probably don't even know. And it's just very sad to think about that. But also, it's like, I mean, they probably spent time building a church community. They spent time going there every Sunday. It's like, we can't just completely forsake our heritage. It's like, a lot of people are like, I'm a conservative Christian. Okay, are you really trying to conserve the traditional heritage of the country, the religious heritage of the country? I mean, we just can't forsake the churches our ancestors built. I think it's cowardice, and I think that it's just not right. I think that, like, our ancestors, we owe a debt to them. I mean, they built the country we live in today, and it's like, are we just going to completely abandon the churches they built? I think that's cowardice, and I mean, it's really doing what the devil wants you to do. So I mean, I'm still Protestant. I think God has called some to be Catholic and Orthodox. I really do believe it's God's will for some people to be Orthodox, some people to be Catholic. I've never been particularly interested in converting people out of those traditions. I'm just trying to say that, like, maybe we should think a second, about completely abandoning the Protestant heritage in this country and, completely changing America culturally. Because if America becomes an Orthodox country, it will be a completely different culture. Because Protestantism has certain presuppositions about the world and affects the way people think very differently than Orthodoxy does. It's just simple as that. I mean, America, if it becomes Catholic, if it becomes Orthodox, it'd be a completely different country. I mean, you saw that with the American Northeast. The American Northeast was originally Protestant. New England, once a Protestant haven. New York, New Jersey, all once very strong Protestant areas. And eventually, because, I mean, you had large amounts of Catholic immigration in the 19th century, these areas became heavily Catholic. The culture completely changed when they became heavily Catholic. And, I mean, you can say the culture changed for the better, changed for the worse, but, I mean, the culture changed, radically changed, and a very different culture. And I think that would happen to all of America if the whole culture went Eastern Orthodox. It became Roman Catholic. America would look more like Russia than it does America. As simple as that, really. We would be Russia. I mean, we really would. We would be a lot more like Russia than the United States of 1900. It'd be a very different society. And that's just what happened. So for me, I'm like, I think our heritage is very important. And I really do want to preserve the institutions our ancestors built. I think it's just very important. Like, so many beautiful buildings are being torn down, or like turned into strip malls, or like if you go to England, especially Europe. Europe's like the apocalypse, man, because like Europe, I mean, they have these beautiful churches, like stuff only us Americans could dream about because they're old, like 1,000-year-old kind of churches, and Europe has just completely apostatized. So they have all these beautiful churches being turned into bars. I've said this a few times on the channel before. The problem with Protestantism today is that we're turning bars into churches and we're letting churches be turned into bars. I mean, it's simple as that. And it's very sad looking at Europe in particular. All these beautiful churches that generations and generations and generations and generations went to church and I mean were baptized and received the sacraments and all those things. And they're like a skate park now or a bar. That's depressing. And it's also, I mean, the will of Satan. I mean, it's just very sad. And I do think we should really try to save the religious heritage in this country. And that's why I do think we should mainline Protestant. I think Protestantism has done a lot of good for the world. I know it's very popular right now to dunk on Protestantism, but I'll just give you one example. I actually won an AP European debate doing this. I mean, I'm a complete history nerd, and I was inside an AP European class, and we were debating who had the bigger effect, Gutenberg, Johannes Gutenberg, or Martin Luther. And I was on the Luther side, and the class was actually split 50-50. We could not make up our minds. Even the teacher said, yeah, I think it was probably Gutenberg. But we were still debating, and because, Gutenberg invents the printing press. Well, really, the Chinese invent the printing press, but whatever. That's a story for another time. Gutenberg invents the printing press for the Europeans, and Martin Luther starts the Protestant Reformation. And we were arguing like, hey, because of Luther, there was more freedom of information, freedom of thought. But then they were like, well, I mean, all that only happens because the printing press. And then I remembered what I've been taught, because I've studied history, that the Protestants taught people to read and write so they could read and write because they could read the Bible and grow closer to God. And when I remembered that, I actually shared that with the class, and I actually won the debate because of that. I actually convinced several people that, like, yeah, Luther had the bigger impact. So that's a moment I'm still very proud of to this day. I actually won a debate, but that's just one example. The Protestants taught people to read and write so they could learn more about the Bible, so they could learn the scriptures. And I know some apologists for the Catholics or the Orthodox will be like, well, there wasn't a printing press, so it's like Protestantism. And I remember the first time I heard this argument, I was like, that's ingenious. And I heard this argument saying that Protestantism couldn't exist without the printing press. And going from like an evangelical Protestant perspective, I was like, wow, you're right. But then I studied history, and I found the Waldensians, the Lollards, the Hussites, and many others that were teaching Protestant doctrines of sola scriptura, which is not the Bible alone, but that's a story for another time. And I was like, hold on, these people did not have a printing press. They are making their own copies of the Bible, but they were still being Protestants. They were studying the Bible together, reading the Bible together. They did not have the ease of mass productions of Bibles, but they were still reading the Bible together. But anyways, back to what I was saying. Because of Protestantism, people can read the Bible. That is directly because of the Protestant faith. The reason you can read and write is because of Protestantism. And the reason you can read your Bible, I just thought to myself, how many people have become Christians because they read the Bible? You find testimonies online all over of people who just read the Bible for themselves and became a Christian. I mean, there are so many testimonies, for instance, of Gideon Bibles. I mean, say what you will about the Gideons, but a lot of people have actually converted to Christianity because they were given a Gideon Bible, and for whatever reason, they decided to read it, and they became a Christian. This has been a well-attested fact. So many people become Christians because they read the Bible for themselves. That's because of Protestantism. You know who invented the first year-round study Bible? Protestants did it, but the Anglicans. The Anglicans had the Book of Common Prayer and still do. And so the Book of Common Prayer, the original Book of Common Prayer, which actually inside England, it was mandatory for everybody to use the Book of Common Prayer and to read the Bible. Anyways, the Book of Common Prayer, you were going to read for the whole Old Testament in a year, and you were going to read through the New Testament 3 times in a year. That's because of Protestants. We have year-round study Bibles. The idea of reading the Bible cover to cover, that became big with Protestants. And still to this day, the Protestants are the ones by far reading the Bible the most. The idea of a Bible study, that's invented by Protestants, the pietists, studying the Bible and talking about it. I mean, the Protestants, if the Bible is God's living and breathing word, who is it working the most in? It's the Protestants. The Protestants are the ones who are reading the scriptures the most by far. I mean, you compare Credo Orthodox, Credo Catholic, and Credo Protestants. Who is most likely to read the Bible cover to cover? Protestants, by a very, very wide margin. There's just no comparison. And I mean, just Protestants are the ones that the scriptures are working the most in. And also, Protestants are the ones doing the most mission work. I mean, for the Protestant Reformation happening 500 years ago, Protestants are on all 7 continents and have made significant inroads into Africa, into Asia, all over the world, even Latin America, historically Catholic Latin America. There are Protestants there now in very large numbers and growing. Protestants have evangelized the whole world. So it's like people talk a lot of crap about Protestantism today, but it's like, just for me, like those are just a few examples. We could talk for hours about stuff that Protestants did for the kingdom of God. And it's just like, for me, the issues Protestantism has today are only more evidence for me of the truth of it, because the devil clearly doesn't like what we're doing. He's clearly fighting against us. People are like, look at the problems in Protestantism. We should all become Eastern Orthodox. No. You see the problems in Protestantism? That means that we're making the devil mad. We're spreading the kingdom of God like we were commanded to. And that means we should stay Protestant and fight for the Protestant institutions and fight for our religious heritage. Anyways, that's just some of my thoughts today. I'm sure I'll make somebody mad for saying all that stuff I did about Protestantism, because it's very popular right now to hate on Protestantism and blame. I've heard everything blamed on Protestants. I've heard people say Protestantism is the reason why there's atheism today. Protestantism is destroyed Christianity. Protestantism is this and that and this and that. I've heard it's so popular to hate on Protestants right now, and I'm like, no. The reason why there's problems with Protestantism today is that Protestantism is making the devil mad. And I could go on. I'm going to make a whole video about ecclesialism and why I'm Protestant and all those different things in the near future. But anyways, thank y'all for watching. The big thing for me is just like study your religious heritage. What church did your ancestors go to? I think it's very important to study that. And find a more traditionally rooted church. I mean, Roman Catholic, Orthodox, fine. I mean, I'm a Protestant. I'm going to defend Protestantism, but I don't care if you're Eastern Orthodox or Roman Catholic. Like, that's what you feel like God called you to be. Good. My big thing is like, find a church that makes you feel close to God. I don't care what church that is. Just as long as they preach, like, don't deny basic stuff like the Trinity or the resurrection of Christ or stuff like that. But I mean, as long as it's like basic stuff like found in the Apostles' Creed or the Nicene Creed, fine. I don't really care all that much. Anyways, those are just some of my thoughts for today. Thank y'all for watching. God bless, and Christ will conquer.